Welcome back to the Student Hub Live. In this session, we're talking about making a difference. And I'm joined by Eric and Jane to discuss some of the really brilliant, innovative projects that the Open University are involved with. It's a really interesting fact that half of the school-age children in the world won't be able to read or write by the time they complete primary education. Half. I mean, that is just an amazing fact. And the OU have been involved for a long time in working with people to sort of help with this in a number of different ways. So, Eric, why are the OU involved in this international development work?
I mean, broadly, it's part of our social mission.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the OU social mission around openness, around inclusion, that's what we're trying to take beyond the borders of the United Kingdom to South Asia in particular and to Sub-Saharan Africa, where a lot of our projects are involved in. It's about taking our expertise around openness, around inclusion, particularly in my school, around education outcomes, and trying to support governments, support non-governmental organizations to improve this stark statistic that you read about. So a lot of our work is around working with schools, working with teachers, working with head teachers, working with colleges of education, and we're beginning to work with national governments to actually influence policy and help them implement policy as well. So it's mainly enacting our social mission beyond the United Kingdom and contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals.
Okay, so this is a big thing. I mean, these Sustainable Development Goals, which have been agreed by the world's nations as part of the 2030 Agenda. Yeah. We've got a question for you at home, which is, don't Google, well, you can Google it if you want to, but everyone always does. Let's face it, HJ, isn't it? So we'd like to know how many Sustainable Development Goals have been agreed as part of the 2030 Agenda. So we'll come back to that a little bit later and see if people are indeed right or not. So, Eric, this is really interesting because there are two key areas that the OU know a lot about. One is distance education and one is about, I guess, how we teach. And teachers are in really short supply in particular areas of the world. But the OU have figured out a range of ways of sort of both upskilling people and also teaching. So two really important areas.
Exactly. And as you say, we're taking our expertise around delivery to scale, because as you read out, the challenges are massive and the challenges need solutions that can work at scale. So we're looking at solutions that can work at scale, but also taking our expertise in educational technology and taking our expertise in teacher professional development to these contexts. So if you take Zimbabwe, for instance, we've got two programs currently running in Zimbabwe. One of them is mainly around making education more accessible to girls. So we're working in situations where we're helping government to develop school-based professional development programs, but with a focus on inclusion and with a focus on gender to try and get as many gender-friendly schools as possible to support this program. We've got another project which is mainly in Zimbabwe as well, which is mainly around working with communities. And within these communities, the key thing is to work with a group of communities to develop resources that will help teachers make teaching more interesting, make it more effective, so that kids actually will enjoy school and enjoy coming to school. We've got another project in Sierra Leone, where in that particular instance, we're looking at building capacity for teachers or for their teacher supply. So we've developed a program which transitions learning assistants into teaching practice. So again, we're working at scale. So to now, over 50,000 practitioners have gone through that program, and we're rolling it out bit by bit to ensure that we reach as many learning assistants as possible.
It's really interesting because while we're sort of helping people do certain things, it's not just a one-way process. And I think that's what's so unique and exciting about this, is that a lot of the stuff that you're doing and finding out about different ways of working and different ways of being, particularly in Sub-Saharan Africa, I mean, just thinking about the internet and Wi-Fi, there are very different challenges in those different contexts. And you guys are bringing stuff back to the Open University as well.
We are. Again, I was just going through the examples and thinking about technology as well. Yeah. If you look at one of our most successful programs, the English in Action program, for instance, which ran for a number of years in in Bangladesh, where we exploited our expertise on using educational technology to teach English. And through that program, we developed lots and lots of professional development assets to support teachers use these simple phones to teach English in their classroom settings, which was very, very powerful, and it's made a huge impact in that context. And we've done we've researched into the impact, and we've published that as well, so people are beginning to see how we've done it. That's one of the things we do. So we don't just develop these programs or deliver these programs. We research how these programs have gone as well and publish out of them, or probably maybe even if it's not a purely empirical study, we publish the outcomes, what we'll call a monitoring evaluation of these projects out there, so people can see what's worked, what can be developed further, and contribute to our understanding of how to solve some of these big global challenges.
Yeah, brilliant. We'll come back to some of those. I wanted to talk to Jane a bit about the Open STEM project as well that you're involved with, because this is something really interesting for students who may not know about our Open STEM laboratories. Here at the OU, we've developed great ways that students can do science at a distance, and it's really interesting the way that you've taken one of these ideas and took to Ghana.
Absolutely, and I think, I mean, one of the things that, to pick up something you were saying earlier, Karen, and that is that population is increasing in Africa. There's huge interest in STEM, I mean, both across the world, but in Africa in particular. Science, technology, innovation. In Ghana's an example of a country where they've made schooling free up to and including upper secondary, so where before parents had to pay to send their children to school at that level, they've made it free. And so there's been a kind of an explosion in the school population. So there's this huge interest from the government of Ghana in improving access to science subjects, the relevance of science subjects, girls' interest in science subjects, because that, you know, I think, as so many of the projects that we're involved in, that this has a kind of a gender lens to it as well. To really get more young people moving in the science subjects through to university and into STEM careers. So that what we're doing is really trying to help in 3 ways, in partnership with Ghanaian partners and under the guidance of the Ghanaian government. And one of them is exactly what you've been saying, and that is starting to use some of the free resources that are available through Open Science Laboratory, making them relevant to the Ghanaian context and making them available as sort of interactive virtual experiments and engagements available to improve the teaching and learning of science at upper secondary level. And one of the things that this does is help to address the infrastructure problems that there are, because inevitably when you've got more young people coming through schooling, and when you've got more interest in science, then you have the problem of the resources and materials available. So that's a way of engaging with that. And there's incredible interest in this in Ghana, and we think more widely across Africa. But also with that, and as you were saying earlier, Karen, then you know, we're interested in teaching and learning. And so it is about also, and again because the government of Ghana wants us to do this, thinking about ways that we could improve science teaching and learning in upper secondary schools. So professional development for science teachers, and we feel, and with our Ghanaian partners, they feel that that the key to this is professional development, which is actually school-based, which is run and organised by heads of department in schools, because they are the people, you know, with our other hats on, leadership and management, you know, our master's programme, then middle leaders are considered to be the kind of the engine room of change. And so this idea of bringing change into schools in ways that are sustainable within the country, but can increase this interest in science teaching and learning and encourage more young people, especially girls, to move into university studying sciences and then into STEM careers.
So there's a couple of key areas. One is, I guess, enabling people to be effective leaders from the management side of the school. And the other side is about teaching. But there's a very interesting area that we haven't spoken about yet, which is about this issue of equipment. And it's one of the things that is brilliant at the OU, because with our open STEM laboratories, we can basically have one piece of equipment that a lot of people can access. I mean, even things like a telescope, for example. That is a massive benefit to people where equipment is a real issue.
It absolutely is. And I mean, you know, I think one of the first things that we're working on with our Ghanaian partners is a digital microscope. And truthfully, you know, we hear from our school partners, and we hear from our university partners that microscopes are in very short supply, you know, in science laboratories in Ghana. But the digital microscope is a way of a whole science class, you know, inside and outside class potentially, at home, being able to interact with a digital microscope in those very ordinary ways, which and the ways include, you know, being able to use it again and again. I think one of the joys of these interactive virtual experiments is that students can make mistakes. You know, students can get it wrong. They have real data on them, and they are real experiments and real engagements. So it allows students to do what we always do with technology, and we do so well when we use technology in a social way, and that is practice, make mistakes, learn, make more mistakes, and make progress that way.
Can you tell us about the collaboration, Eric?
Yes, I mean, one of the things that we're doing increasingly is, first of all, situating our programs within national policy. So if you take Open STEM Africa, for instance, everything that we're doing is situated in the national policy context. So we're working with the government, and we're working with key partners within the country to ensure that these programs are sustainable. Yeah. So beyond the life of the project, which is more or less being led by us or be co-led by a partner, beyond the life of the funding available for the program, it's embedded within national policy, it's embedded within national systems, so it carries on beyond the life of the program.
So you're going into a situation and teaching people to teach other people so that it becomes something that is able to
be sustainable. And we're doing that through a variety of ways. And as I said, increasingly we're embedding our programs within national policy. So we're doing that in Ghana. We're doing that in Myanmar, with regards to the program that we're doing with education colleges, which is sort of colleges that educate teachers. So we're doing that through our work. We're doing an educational technology review with the aim of supporting them to be able to scale up deliver their programs through educational technology. In Zambia, the school-based professional development program that we're doing, as well as situated within national policy, and it's an aspiration within the Zambia education system to have school-based approaches to teacher professional development. So instead of taking teachers outside the classroom to have to improve on practice or to look at new innovative ways of teaching and learning, this is school-based, and that's one of the approaches that we're promoting that. But increasingly, we're doing that with government, and we're doing that with local partners. And that's, as you said, that's very, very key. That's crucial. So yes, that's one of the key ways in which we're broadening our expertise and actually ensuring that it is sustainable. And that's one of the fundamental things that we're doing now, to ensure that we have the right partners, both locally and internationally, to deliver the programs, to ensure that the knowledge that we're transferring actually stays in country and can actually be expanded. But again, through that partnership, we also learn quite a lot. I mean, there are key things that we pick up from our international work that actually fits into our curriculum, but also helps us build partnerships or relationships with academics in some of these countries where we publish, where we kind of research some of this work and publish as well.
Now, Eric, we asked people at home how many Sustainable Development Goals have been agreed to by the world's nations. Okay. Unsurprisingly, they've got the right answer.
Oh, brilliant.
Partly because they have access to the internet, I think. Right, okay. The right answer is 17, which people have got at home. Yeah. So well done. And if you've enjoyed this sort of activity, you can come along next Monday at 2 o'clock to our Wheel of Ologies quiz and play with Team Home in our fun Ologies-based session where we'll talk about lots of interesting questions. But Eric, you've chosen to mention this. Why are these sustainable goals important, and what in particular about them sort of relates to this whole idea about supporting other countries? Okay,
right. The Sustainable Development Goals, I'll say, it's UNESCO's commitment, but I'll say it's the whole world's commitment to collaborate to more or less deliver a sustainable world. And by that, what that means is that there are key areas within that's happening around us in the world that we really need to look at carefully to ensure that we sustain the environment within which we live. And in terms of the goals, they range from issues around hunger and poverty all the way to ways in which we can actually partner each other and collaborate to be able to ensure that whatever we're doing actually impacts each other's work and to ensure that we live sustainably. But in relation to our particular work, it's mainly around what we call SDG 4. And the fourth SDG is around education. And it's around providing an inclusive education and seeing education as a lifelong activity. And that's one of the things that we hold on to in my school. So all our programs are designed in such a way, in that way. We see education as an inclusive activity, but we also want to promote lifelong learning.
Okay. Now, I'm just very mindful that within the School of Education, Childhood, Youth and Sport, we've got these collaborations with STEM. So this is a very inter- or cross-disciplinary way of working, which is becoming increasingly common and relevant as we sort of take different methods and ideas from the various different disciplines.
Yes. Yeah, that's very common. And again, even within our own school, we have colleagues who work in the health sector. And a lot of the work, that's an interesting thing about the Sustainable Development Goals. All 17 of them actually interconnect in one way or the other, because if you're working in education, there's a likelihood that the outcomes that you have will have an impact on health outcomes. Possible that they will even have on the first Sustainable Development Goal, which is around poverty. To be able to eradicate poverty in some of these lowly resourced countries, you have to revamp education, you have to revamp healthcare. So that's an interesting bit of the work. So yes, we do collaborate with health and well-being colleagues, and we do collaborate with STEM colleagues as well, as Jane has been mentioning.
Okay. So I'm going to end by asking both of you this so what question in terms of some of the work that you're doing. And I guess, so what does that mean for our students, and what are we bringing back here in terms of learnings, apart from feeling good about stuff and helping make the world a better place? How is it benefiting our students?
Well, I mean, I think generally to start off with, and I think it was something that Eric already mentioned, and that is that in our projects and the ones that I'm involved in and have been involved in, but Open STEM Africa in particular right now, it is about co-learning, it is about co-design, it is about co-development. In other words, it's not about bringing expertise to Africa, it's about sharing expertise across national and continental boundaries. And so I think we're bringing learning back. And I think one of the things, you know, that increasingly is happening in Africa, with all of the challenges, the ones that Eric has quite rightly been pointing out, then Africa is leapfrogging some of the approaches to technology, some of the approaches to education, some of the approaches to sciences and innovation that we have in the UK, because it's starting now, as it were, or starting recently. So I think we bring back that learning. That's one thing. I think the second thing is, you know, any collaboration in terms of collaboration across disciplines. So, you know, in OU terms, this is about across our faculties, is incredibly enriching, I think. I mean, Eric and you have mentioned research, but this idea of research which focuses on both STEM and education is innovative, I think, and interesting. And I think those kind of multidisciplinary approaches are increasingly what our students are interested in. But I think one of the things that for me is that, you know, I'm an educationalist, and so it's interesting to be leading an open STEM project. But you know, I think, broadly speaking, education is always about something, and so it's, you know, the education, the teaching and learning of science, I think, is of interest both in terms of the pedagogies, both in terms of the kind of the conceptual frameworks of education, but also exactly in what ways the teaching of science may or may not be different to the teaching of other disciplines or other subjects. And so we bring all of that back with all of the work that we do.
Brilliant. And Eric, a final word from you. We've heard already about how you've been writing and bringing some of this knowledge back in terms of management side of things.
Yeah. Yes, and I mean, a typical example is some of the colleagues that work on our teacher education Sub-Saharan Africa program, for instance, are beginning to bring some of those resources and the learning into the development of a new Masters in Education teaching and learning pathway that we've created. So that's a really practical example of how that learning is coming into our own curriculum, and they're drawing from experiences, they're drawing on case studies of things, of real life situations, because remember, our students are very international. Yeah. So it's very, very important that we don't make our courses UK-centric, but these give us the opportunity to widen and the reach of our students. I mean, a typical example is on the Strengthening Adolescent Girls Education Program In Zimbabwe, there's a lot of learning that is coming into our education studies primary program, because colleagues involved in that program are actually working with colleagues in Zimbabwe and opening up new ideas, opening up new ways of dealing with complex situations. And in that particular situation, for instance, they're creating learning, as I said earlier, they're creating learning hubs to promote community-based learning. I mean, this is very fascinating. Yeah. And that learning, in terms of how that's happening, that's how that's playing out within that context, the challenges or the good things that are coming up, they can actually bring into the curriculum. So as education studies primary students can appreciate how community-based learning actually takes place in very low resource countries. Yeah.
And it's a prime opportunity to be able to do things where everyone's got a mobile phone, everyone's interacting in ways like that, but it may not be possible to do right here.
Exactly.
Perfect. Yeah. Jane and Eric, thank you so much. It's been a really, really useful session. So what we're going to do now is show you around the physical library, which is here on campus. Most of you will be using the library virtually, perhaps texting or contacting them in the middle of the night when you've got a query about referencing. So my next session is going to be about using the OU library. But before that, let me just take you on a tour of the library on campus, which incidentally you are all very welcome to come and see for yourselves. I'll see you in a few minutes.